Welcome to another episode of AnimeCons TV. My name is Doug Wilder. This week I'm going to talk to you guys about one of the more versatile tools you can get when you're working with harder materials for making props or costumes. It's called a Rotary tool. A lot of people refer to these as Dremels. Dremel's actually a name brand, as you can probably see right there. That's the name of the brand of this one. But the proper name is a Rotary tool. It's kind of like how people use Kleenex for tissues or just Band-Aid for bandages. It's a pretty good thing to get used to, especially if you're going to make a lot of like armor or props or things like this. Good Rotary tool, there, I even did it, will run you anywhere from $20 to $120. I'd say roughly a good one will run you probably about $60. I think this is about what this model goes for. One thing I recommend if you're going to be starting looking for one, they do offer ones that are battery powered or have rechargeable batteries. I recommend getting one with a cord like that because of the nature of the projects you're often going to be using this for. It's better to just kind of have continuous power versus kind of having to stop, recharge, or replace a battery and kind of lose momentum. It's obviously a matter of preference, but I personally recommend with a cord. So, of course, now I answer the question: what is a Rotary tool and what do you use it for? So, the Rotary tool is just, you see a kind of set of variable speeds right here that makes this little end spin at high speeds, and you can use it for a lot of different uses. Drilling's one, but you attach different attachments to the head, kind of like that. Like this is just a sanding head, and you just spin this little chuck right here to secure it in. But so there's things like sanding. This is just kind of a sanding head. Grinding, here's kind of a grinding one. And there's even one like just like a cutting wheel. Like this is one you can use for cutting a lot of things. This even will go through some metals. Like I've used it to cut off screws of things and things like that. It's there's even more uses as you go on. It's one of those things one of the tools I kind of say that you realize how much you can use it as the more often you have it. The other thing is there's a lot of different kind of accessories and things like that you can get for Rotary tools, such as kind of just making routing, like cutting small parts into wood, things like that. One thing that I personally recommend a lot, this is just called a flex shaft, and it's just kind of a finer tip, like you can see it right there. I'd still attach the chuck here, but it's on a nice long cord like that I just plug this in to the top of my Rotary tool, and it makes it a lot easier to just kind of get into some of the finer areas of whatever I'm working on. There's countless accessories for Rotary tools. It seems like every time I go to Home Depot or just even a local hardware store, I'm realizing there's more attachments, more accessories that you can get for your Rotary tool. If you are looking at it into those, don't go crazy. This is one of those things that it seems like every new week there's something to try, and it's a real slippery slope that you can buy a lot of things that you might not necessarily use. So if you're looking at kind of accessories and attachments, think about the task you want to do first, and is this something you're going to do very often, or it would just be kind of nice to have. So basically, you just, like I said, you speed up your Dremel and get that little spot in and go to work. But before you do that, something I will mention right off the bat is, because this is a power tool, and even just any old tool, safety first. When you're thinking about where you're going to use this, because you're grinding stuff off, you're going to generate a lot of dust. Wear older clothes that you don't mind getting a little dusty. I mean, it will wash off, but that's something to keep in mind. If you're gonna, because of all the dust and everything like that, use a good space. Outside's a great option if it's nicer weather. If you have kind of an unfinished basement or a workshop in your basement, that's another thing. Or if you just have a garage, you can use that too. That's the big thing. But now that you know where you're going to use it, some other stuff to make sure you have are, first off, a pair of good safety goggles. I've actually had just a couple narrow, close calls like that. I think you can actually probably see some of the scratches like right there from stuff flying in my eyes. So that's super important, because no matter how careful you are, parts will go flying off, and especially with plastic, that can get a little dangerous if you're not careful. Another thing that's super important is just a dust mask, because again, if you're making a lot of this dust, you don't want to be breathing it, especially if it's plastic. It's not going to be any permanent harm, but you just don't want to be breathing plastic dust. And it seems like common sense, but we always want to give those warnings. Safety gloves like this, just regular work glove, are always a good option. A lot of people, once they get a little more experience with it, don't tend to use them, and that's okay. But they prefer to have a good. But as always, like I said, remember, this is a power tool. You're spinning stuff at a high speed. You're cutting things. Don't do anything rash. Don't do anything silly. Be careful. If you have someone who has a rotary tool that can show you a little bit more ins and outs and kind of supervise you as you learn how to use it, even better. And speaking of learning how to use it, something that I've found super important, and as I've personally taught a couple people how to get confident with a rotary tool, is practice. Especially if it's a material you haven't used before. If it's a different kind of wood, because wood has different, various woods have different densities, or different plastics. Use scraps that you've had. If you had to cut off a little bit of something, just get used to how it feels, how it resists, how it reacts to what you're trying to do, and that'll just give you a better shape for it. So just kind of, here's a little bit of footage that I shot of just some of the examples of what I did. So first off, you're going to see here's just kind of the cutting wheel on a section of old section of PVC pipe, and I'm also now going to be doing, and also now here you see I'm using kind of the carving tool, and you see I'm kind of making some little details there. If you see a lot of characters that have are carrying a staff that's very ornate, have a lot of carved, like it's supposed to be carved wooden, using kind of carving tools on PVC pipe is a great way to kind of cheat into there and just kind of get in and make these patterns yourself without having to carve actual wood. It will still take a fair amount of time. Go slow, be patient, but it's something that will definitely make things easier overall and will save you some time. Next up, here's a piece of scrap wood I'm doing. I'm just using kind of the sanding head on it. Something to just keep in mind is that you don't want to go too fast. I think you might be able to even see here, I kind of cranked it up to full speed, and because just the friction got so high, I am no longer just sanding the wood, I'm literally burning it. And that's something you might be able to get a cool effect with it, but I would not recommend it. And once again, this will save time, but you still don't want to rush. You still want to be careful. And finally, here's just the grinding head on just a little bit of ABS plastic, and you see it kind of melts it into a little bit that you can just kind of break off and clean off an edge, and then you can just use a little piece of sandpaper to get a cleaner run. You can also use kind of the cutting wheel on it, and the nice thing about cutting is with ABS plastic, you can actually get some nice scraps that you want to hold on to, even though. So first off, you're probably asking, well, why save the scraps? Well, if you get a nice glass jar, and I gotta emphasize glass, don't use plastic. So glass like this is just like an old kind of fancy mustard jar. Salsa jars work really well. And if you look in there, that's just some putty. Basically how you make that is you take some scraps that you cut up, and if you want to just kind of, especially if they're a little bit narrower like this, This is just some pieces from a costume project that I'm working. But you just kind of rip them off and things like that. So here's a nice piece, just kind of fold it up, and you get some smaller pieces. Like, I'd say no bigger than about that, like maybe a little thumbnails, not much bigger than thumbnail piece. Put them in that glass jar with some acetone, which is just paint remover, but you make sure it's acetone. Let it sit overnight. Usually you want to do about a 1-to-1 ratio, maybe a little more plastic bits than acetone, and it'll turn into a putty. And that putty is really useful for things like, say you have a piece like this, like here's a nice piece of a costume project that I'm not going to disclose yet. You'll have to stay tuned and find out later what that is. But say you have a crack like this, and you have a nice little slit right there. You apply putty to that, let it set overnight, and you'll be able to just kind of seal it up. You'll have to sand it down, like just use regular sandpaper, or if you're a little more confident with just kind of like a random orbit sander, depending on the size, if it's a larger thing. And you'll get kind of seamless gap. It does, sometimes you'll often get air, you'll see pockets of where there were air bubbles in it, which is just kind of, once that's done, reapply some more, fill in the gaps, let it dry again, sand it again, and it'll take a couple goes, but it makes some really nice seamless things. And this is really good if you're doing, like, say, armor or things like that. Here now you'll see some footage. This is a piece of armor that I've been working on. It's not quite finished, so you see it's not totally smooth yet. But if you look, you see there's kind of no seam. These were two pieces that I fused together using ABS putty, and it's a great way to do that. So if you have a piece of armor that you want to give the illusion that it really looks like one piece, or really make it one piece, there you go. Once again, I'm just going to remind everybody that if you're thinking about a Dremel, or you're going to start using one, safety first, practice second. It's very useful. I've had mine for a little more than 5 years now, and I can't tell you how much time it saved me, how useful it's been, and just, it's been a really good boon for practice. Just getting used to harder materials and stuff like that. I've used it for non-costume projects too, so it's, again, a good one. Will probably run you around $60, get something that's corded, but it's a nice investment. It will last you a good long time, especially if you take good care of it. If you're thinking about getting one, go to your local hardware store. Even anything from the big stores to even some of the small, kind of smaller ones around the corner often have some out for display that you can, at least put in your hand, feel the weight, see how they feel, get it. And a lot of people will kind of answer your questions about it, and they'll often have charts about, well, this one has this, but not this. This one has that. Things like accessories, like if you need to get more, like say more of these sanding ones, as you can see, this one's starting to get a little worn out just from frequent use. They're not that expensive. Just kind of refills of consumables, or kind of the bigger ones like the flex shaft that I showed you earlier. These are really good ones that they're not that expensive to get, but if you're, maybe you're updating your birthday wish list, or, putting something down for the holidays, these are pretty low cost gifts that you can tell someone, hey, this is something useful, not just a toy. It's something that goes for more practical use, and that often helps a lot of family members feel like they're giving you something that's not just kind of junk and things like that. But on the other hand of it, it's also good for giving gifts. If you know someone that has a rotary tool that they use a lot, people can always use more sanding heads, things like that. And they make accessory kits that are, 20 pieces to some that come with like 100 pieces. And there's a million and one uses, it feels like sometimes. So definitely consider that for either requesting or giving gifts. And if you have any thoughts on rotary tools, maybe you had a fun project that you worked on for a costume that you want to show you results for, or if you have questions about it, or maybe you have another tool that you'd like us to talk about on the podcast, don't forget to reach out to us. You can put a note right in our comments. Send us an email. We're at podcast@animecons.tv. You can also send us a comment on Facebook or Twitter. And finally, don't forget we can always take a voicemail too at 762-ADEQUATE. Once again, my name is Doug Wilder, and we'll see you guys again next time.